Wanted to share with you a little bit about lean thinking. Obviously, this comes from kind of lean manufacturing, which you've probably heard of but may not know too much about. When I used to be an accountant in professional services world, I used to think, oh, lean thinking, that's not relevant to me. It's to do with manufacturing. I'm not a manufacturer. I don't make products, I make services. Um, but what I realized very quickly once I understood it was it's very, very relevant to professional services firms. And now I help professional services firms to take a kind of light version of lean thinking into their organizations, just as it is relevant, very relevant to not-for-profit organizations, government organizations, charities, etc., because it's the same kind of point. So let me just share a little bit about lean to maybe help you on your journey to becoming a little bit more lean as an organization, which is probably inevitable as budget constraints kind of move in your direction. So lean thinking. Typically producing the product or service, you obviously have services rather than products, I think, generally, but doing it at the minimum cost, but without reducing quality or value for the customer. Customer is obviously the end user, in your case, probably residents, could be customers, clients, passengers, patients, depending on your organization as to who you see as the customer, the person you are serving in your organization. So it's producing the product or service at minimum cost, but without reducing quality. So if we take out cost, but we take out value to the customer, that's not waste. That's not really lean thinking because you're taking out muscle, not fat. We're talking about taking fat out here, which actually doesn't impact the value that the customer gets at all, or doesn't impact it very much. And lean works generally on a pull principle. So, for example, a good example of this is Rolls-Royce motor cars. Um, they you cannot buy a Rolls-Royce motor car off the shelf. They don't build lots of Rolls-Royces, put them in a showroom, and then you go and buy one. That isn't how they work. What happens is, if you want a Rolls-Royce, you go to Rolls-Royce and they unpack your specification of what you want, then they go and build it for you to order, exactly to order. So that's a kind of pull process of manufacturing rather than a push where you build and try and sell. Um, so it means you have no waste because you are buying to order or building to order. Very similar to the kind of zero-based budgeting type thinking. And there's a separate video on that. If you're making cars and lean manufacturing thinking comes from the car industry, Toyota in particular, um, then holding stock is a problem because for two reasons. One, you have to have a warehouse to store stock in or some kind of venue, storage space. That costs money to have, but it also ties up cash. So if you have stock, you have to invest in stock. That ties up cash. So you can't use the cash for something else. So one of the principles of lean thinking is to try and eliminate stock as best we can. And so they have a thing which you will have heard of called just in time, where you have supplier delivery to line. So Toyota, for example, don't really want to hold hundreds of thousands of wheels in stock um, so that they can use them whenever they want to put them onto their cars on the manufacturing line, as it's called. What they do is they get their suppliers to deliver the wheels just in time, just when they need them. And so they don't really hold stock or don't hold much stock. So that's quite a clever way of working to eliminate cost in that way. And they have very close relationships with their suppliers, which of course they have to make that work. Similarly, what Toyota do is they work on eliminating what they call non-value added steps. So you take out what they call muda, waste, um, steps which we're doing which don't add any value to the customer. So you have to do some analysis in that. And there are other videos in this series which talk about how you might do that. There's another principle called flow, which is if you think of a production process where you're producing cars, it's constantly in motion. If it has to stop for any reason, that's like picking up a book and putting it down when you're reading it. You kind of really lose the thread. And of course, that's hugely expensive if you have to stop the line from moving. So the principle of flow is very powerful, and it talks about eliminating bottlenecks and stoppages because that costs huge amounts of money and slows the whole process down. So flow is a very important principle in lean. Another important principle is to try and eliminate quality control, because technically, if you think about it, having quality control, checking doesn't actually add value to a product or process. We know why we do it, obviously, but it doesn't add any value. So in lean, what they try and do is eliminate quality control, because that's expensive to have that. So they get each person doing their own quality control. So the rule in lean is to never pass on a defect. So you do your own checking before you pass it up the line to the next person. So these are some of the kind of processes that and ways of thinking within lean. It originally came, as I said, from actually it's credited to come from this guy Taiichi Ohno, who originally started in Toyota. They used to have a textiles division, and then he moved over to the automotive division in 1943. But he's kind of known as the Toyota production system founder, which then itself was the basis of what's considered in the West lean manufacturing. And Ohno identified 7 wastes, which became then a way of auditing and taking out unnecessary costs from a system. So there are other videos on the 7 wastes and other process mapping systems in this series, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of background as to where this has come from and where the thinking comes from, so that you can consider putting your kind of waste goggles on, your lean thinking goggles on, and actually see your world from a lean manufacturer's point of view. And that will give you a very good sense of understanding, if you're spending money on something, whether it's actually adding value to the customer and whether we can do it in a slightly different way. So lean thinking will be very helpful to you in going through this process. Good luck with it.